City Council work session for Tuesday, September 5th. We only have one item on the agenda tonight, the Prairie Fire Development Group presentation. Mr. Feuerborn.
Thank you, sir. I will turn the floor over immediately to Mr. Tapp, who will do our introductions for us this evening.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. I appreciate your time on a Tuesday evening, and we will honor that time and respect it as well. I've had the distinct pleasure of building a relationship with Prairie Fire Development Group probably for a year now or plus. We built the seed, planted the seed, built the seed, and we've been talking for all this time about a potential project in Raymore. And we've been working with them on site selection and worked on multiple sites, and we arrived at one as a potential proposal project. With me to my right is Jared Nook with Prairie Fire Development Group. And Jared, I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to you to discuss the finer points of the project and of Prairie Fire Development Group. And we also have hard copies of the presentation to hand out as well.
Is there enough for me?
Yes, should be.
Here, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for meeting tonight. I know it's always fun to do this in the evening and use up your valuable family time. Like Mr. Tapp said, my name is Jared Nook. I work with Prairie Fire Development Group, and we are here based in Kansas City, and our primary focus is affordable housing, particularly in the multifamily and in senior developments. Quick overview. I'll skip through this stuff and get to the good stuff here. We're a vertically integrated company. We have a development, construction, and property management company. We believe in developing and constructing and managing our assets. I think it provides us with the best control to make sure we're giving everyone a quality product. Like I said, our primary focus is on multifamily and senior housing. We use affordable housing program, the Section 42, the IRS tax code, and use tax credits as our primary equity source. We've got a pretty diverse background of experience, real estate, architecture, accounting, development, so on and so forth, construction. We've got projects all over, primarily right now, building-wise, we're in Kansas and Missouri. We just finished 108 units in Columbus Park neighborhood in downtown Kansas City. We've done some work in Brookside, and then we've got projects primarily in central Kansas between Salina and Wichita. We are targeting a handful of projects in Oklahoma right now, Colorado, Nebraska, Texas, actually. Let's see here. Well, Kelly Raby, he's one of the co-founders of the firm. He heads up our development group, and then myself. I work with Kelly and the other partner, Rudy, who heads up our construction and property management company. I work between both parties, kind of as a mediation between construction and development. So my background is more on the construction side, although I'm pretty heavily involved in development as well. I can just kind of skim over this. You guys have, I'm sure, no doubt seen LIHTC projects come through before. There is all sorts of wonderful telling statistics of why this is a vital program to our country right now. There is a housing crisis, and there are multiple bills on both the Senate and the House floor right now to expand the LIHTC program, and it's one of the few things that Congress, both sides of the aisle, can seem to agree upon. So we're looking forward to seeing both those bills pass. It looks like they'll likely be passed this year.
Sure, just for
Yes, sir.
For our viewing audience that might be watching, could you please explain what LIHTC is?
Sure. LIHTC is the Low-Income Tax Credit Housing Program. The IRS established this program, I think it was back in the 80s, as kind of an alternative to HUD. And what the LIHTC program is it basically the government and the IRS allocate a dollar amount of tax credits every year to the various states. Some states like Missouri have a state tax credit as well as a federal tax credit. Kansas only has a federal tax credit. What that is, and what we're proposing, is what's called a 9% tax credit. and it is a competitive process. The state awards a certain amount of tax credits on an annual basis, and you have to apply in order to basically get 9% over of eligible. Yeah, I'm getting in the weeds. You have to apply basically and submit an application to the state to get the allocation, and that allocation is what provides you the equity to basically underwrite your entire project. Between the equity and then a minimal amount of permanent debt or loan on the project is what helps keep rents low and therefore affordable. So the tax credit program is driven by the IRS. It is not a true government-run program. The IRS allocates those funds to the states allocate the funds to private developers. Private developers have to apply and be awarded those projects. We will turn around, sell those tax credits to private entities, public entities, banks, large corporations who use it to offset their tax liability, in corporate tax liability. So that's the LIHTC program in a nutshell. And I guess the other important piece of that is the compliance part of that. States require a 15-year period in which you have to maintain tax credit compliance. That means that we have to be in full compliance. Everyone that lives in there has to be, that is eligible for the tax credits, tax credit units, the affordable units. They have to meet certain income requirements. They have background checks. They have, they can't have criminal records. They have to have a job or some source of income because it's not a handout. You have to earn money and pay rent to be able to live in one of the tax credit units. And then during that 15-year period, those units will stay affordable throughout that time frame. Some states in the QAP, the Qualified Action Plan from Missouri, hasn't quite come out yet. Some states require a 30-year hold period. Some states have a 15-year with the option to do 30, and you get extra points. So there's a varying degree in which the project has to remain in compliance. But during that period, we have to follow rigorous standards set forth by both our investors who make sure the property is upkept and the IRS and the governing agencies who perform annual inspections and audits on all the files and the property itself. So, thank you. Just quick, again, quick trend. Over 50%, or right around 50% of all renters in the U.S., their average income is $35,000 or less. So you can see all of this product being built in the Metro KC. That's going for $1,500 to $2,000 a month is very cost burdening of many residents, and there's not a lot of options for them other than old and oftentimes not well taken care of properties. Rents have continually increased over the last 15 years, while on a percentage of cost of living basis, income has stayed relatively flat. So that burden has continued to grow in terms of real dollars. Quick example, this is the project. This is actually just one of 5 buildings we built in Columbus Park. This is our 54-unit building. We have 4 others. 3 are 16-unit walk-ups, and 1 is a 6-unit building. It was an $18.5 million property on 4 acres that was owned by Kansas City. We built 108 units on it. It's got several common area spaces, a test kitchen area, a workout facility, and just some other open areas for the residents to use. Those areas are for the residents. You can do it, but it's complicated. Typically put true retail in these. All common areas are designated for the public and that lives in the community, and we can certainly, and like we've talked with Columbus Park, work out arrangements where a community could hold an event there or have some interaction in those spaces. Columbus Park was 50% affordable and 50% market, so we use tax credits to help underwrite regular market rate rents. Anyone can rent those. You don't have to be income qualified. The benefit is that we're able to underwrite our rents at substantially lower rates than our competition in the neighboring developments in the river market. which has allowed us to be 100% leased upon completion with a wait list. Here's just a quick before and after. This was an old MoDOT facility. I've heard that's a bad word in here, so I'll just leave it at that. So you can see there's a couple, sorry, the images aren't great, but there's a couple other examples of some of the buildings, walk-up buildings that we've got there. So now we'll get to the project here in Raymore. We initially started out by looking at some of the lots here around the city circle, municipal circle area, and due to some of the zoning requirements, we ended up looking just outside. Matt worked hard with some local real estate guys to identify some lots he thought would be beneficial for the project. And speaking with the landowner, we kind of settled on two full lots and half of another lot, which rounds out to 2 acres. And what we're going to propose is a 46-unit multifamily building that would be restricted, age restricted to 55 and older. We're looking at 16 2-bedrooms and 31 bedroom units, all 1 bathroom. And we would have a market and affordable split of 60% affordable and 40% market rate. Again, doing that helps us use tax credits to underwrite the market rate rents at a lower rate, just expanding the net at which we can cast into the community. Amenities-wise, we would have a common area room similar to the Columbus Park project, large open space that could be used for a variety of things, yoga, art galleries, social events. We'd also include on-site laundry. Our goal would be to have in-unit laundry in every single unit. As it currently stands in Columbus Park, we have a single laundry unit in the large 54 building. That's only 4 tenants in that building, but we've heard a lot of feedback that some of our other units have in-unit laundry, and that's been a big plus, so that's something we'd like to try to take advantage of. And then also probably like a media room or someplace where you could have movies, watch a game, that sort of thing. So the project as we're proposing, and this is just kind of a quick test fit. Obviously, we're not going to build a blue, light blue, and yellow building, but those would approximately be the size of units. I think they're right around 900 square feet for a 2-bedroom and 800 for a 1-bedroom. So they're a decent size. We're looking at around an $8 million total budget, development budget, and approximately $5.9 million in construction. And then rents on the affordable units, we'd be at $625 and $725 for 1 and 2s respectively, and $825 and $925 for 1 and 2s on market respectively. One of the things that we've been talking with Matt and Mr. Fearborn and some of the other city folks in our meetings is some kind of city incentive. I know there's been some discussion on full property tax abatement, and I think having talked with Matt, the route we'd like to propose and go with would be the sales tax abatement, Chapter 100, on only during construction on construction-related materials. This just helps us in our construction costs, which ultimately underwrites our rents. We would save on an estimated basis, or probably around $250,000 to $400,000. As I mentioned earlier, we have our own construction company, and we do build our own projects. Our construction company is there solely to build our own projects. We don't do third-party work, but as a part of that, we do purchase all the materials for our projects. We don't run those through subs, so we incur a lot of those costs and can see what the benefit of having sales tax exemption on construction would be, and allowing us to save both in credit request and then ultimately keep our permanent debt lower so we can underwrite to the lower rents and continue to provide an affordable project. So I believe, and Matt or Mr. Fearborn may have I believe this is the case, 1.5 spots per unit was the zoning code that I saw for parking. So 46 units, we'd be at 69 units. This is certainly not done by a civil engineer, so please be kind. I did this. We would do we've proposed in some of the other communities we've been working in this concept of agrihood, and that's not something we're proposing here per se, but both Kelly and Rudy, the co-owners of our firm, have farms, and farming and agriculture is something that's pretty dear to them. And we've had projects where we've instituted planter boxes and other, kind of agricultural type components that have been very well received by residents. Gives them a nice little activity, farm to table type, food, and it's nice to continually bring that into more of an urban environment. Obviously, we wouldn't have a giant hoop house or anything like that, but some well-designed incorporated landscape would be something we would definitely try to do. Architecture, I'm an architect by trade. I love design, and I was talking to Matt earlier. We'll do everything in our power to provide a high quality, high design building. Obviously, money is an ultimate driver in what we can afford from a construction perspective, and construction costs have not been kind over the last 2 years and continue to rise astronomically, particularly lumber. But we do value design, as you can see in our Columbus Park project, and we do want to bring something that looks very nice to the community. Even in more traditional neighborhoods, we try to do high quality construction in everything we do. We use fiber cement or LP siding. We don't use vinyl. We put stone on our buildings. Frankly, you'd probably not be able to tell our buildings apart from any of the other buildings that are, for sale, single family homes or duplexes that are renting for twice ours. I already mentioned the on-site amenities and the common space. Material-wise, like I mentioned, we use cement board siding. Columbus Park was all cement board and stucco. We would look at using brick, probably a face brick, full-blown masonry like we did on Columbus Park was really expensive and probably did not help our final budget on that project. We might also look at some materials, some more contemporary materials like a metal panel, like a nice metal panel, or stucco. So again, we're trying to provide a quality product. We don't want to come in here and build some cheap vinyl-sided building. It'd be a four-side architecture for sure. Our development team, obviously Prairie Fire Development Group is a developer. Prairie Fire Construction Group would come in as the contractor in some capacity, whether it's full-blown general contractor or a construction manager role. And then the architect that we've looked at using for this project is Automo. The owner of that firm used to be my boss at BNIM, and so she's a rock star and would do a very good job. Just a couple of examples. Obviously, we showed the Columbus Park project, and you can see our Columbus Park project is not too far off from something like this. Again, we'd like to use materials similar to this, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this is, I believe, like a metal panel, in here. So, we're not talking about the stuff you see on the side of barns and tobacco houses. This nice pre-finished, Firestone metal panel. Again, similar kind of design. So, we would definitely lean towards the more contemporary side of design. Couldn't do a lot, would do some storefront, but, units would be a nice vinyl window. We wouldn't, ideally, there would not be just your white vinyl window. Our Columbus Park, we had special order color windows made, and they turned out really nice. So just a couple more examples, just to really kind of give you a look and feel. We're not, again, we want to do something that kind of complements the architecture of the Civics Circle here and the new community center that was built. I know some of the architects over at Drawwell, and they do a very good job. So that's kind of our proposal. Tax credit application, state of Missouri finally got around to setting their deadline. It is December 1st. So what we're here, asking for as a developer is a resolution of support. Anytime we come and do development in the community, since we're here for 15 to 30 years, we want to come in and be well received by the community and have a quality relationship with the community, because we're here to help service the community and the citizens of this community, and we're not going anywhere, so we want to make sure we get along with everybody. I mentioned the Chapter 100, the sales tax abatement on construction. That's a pretty important piece to the development and something that we would like to continue further discussions on. We will submit our application to MHDC December 1st. They have a several-month vetting period. Then they'll give notices to everybody, probably February timeframe, March. And then from there, if we're awarded, we'll basically select an investor, be a tax credit syndicator like Boston Capital, Raymond James, somebody like that. And then we'll go through like a 15-page long checklist of stuff we have to give them in order to get the project closed. And that process takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. It's a pretty long process. And that would also be the time we'd go through, any zoning and any other additional necessary procedural things we need to do with the city in order to get the project going, building permits, plan review, all of that kind of stuff. And then on a building like this, we'd figure probably in the 12 to 16-month range on construction, more likely closer to the 12-month side. It's fairly straightforward construction, and we've got some experience building this kind of a building, so I think we could get it done pretty quickly. So that's the project in a nutshell, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Mr. Boyhead.
Mr. Nook, or actually Mr. Tapp would probably know this better. What's the existing zoning for lots 99 through 101?
It's a commercially zoned, sir.
Okay, and Mr. Nook, since you're not using the northern half of lot 101, what's the anticipated use for that in the future?
I can't say. That'd be up to the landowner.
Do you own, so you don't, you're purchasing the whole 101 lot?
We would
just
only be
the
purchasing half of
southern
it,
half?
and it'd be replatted, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Anyone else? I will tell you, when the economic development team met, probably was about 6 weeks ago, 5-6 weeks ago, and Jared was there and gave the presentation. Other areas of the city were kind of looked at, but I knew that Mr. Conway had the properties over here and had originally intended for kind of a retirement community over there as an intended purpose. So this is not too dissimilar with the Plus 55 program that's being proposed to us today. And to fall in line with our overall program with the Mid-America Regional Council for Community for All Ages, it does kind of fit into that opportunity for us to build a facility that would really kind of enhance this area as a community district, as a potential downtown area. And as a Plus 55, I thought it would be much more palatable to the individuals here because it is a low income, but it's not no income type project. And not too dissimilar from the Ridgeway project up behind Culver's, which seems to have gone, while it was kind of shoved down your throats, I know originally it has been swallowed as a pretty good project and is producing very well right now with like an 80-person waiting list. So we do know that there is a need for this type of project in our community, and they kind of heavily put the weight on my shoulders and said, Mayor, are you willing to support us on this project if we push it forward to the city council? And after much soul searching and deliberation on that, thinking about all the different things that I just mentioned, I do feel like it, from my perspective, that it's a great project for that particular piece of property, which is already kind of multifamily with duplexes around it anyway. And anyway, I feel like that piece of property would be a good project. And what Jared is here tonight to do is get a consensus on our part to go through with the resolution that would then produce that letter that they can put in their application with the state of Missouri. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fearborn? Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. Does this project require the developer to provide the parkland or fee in lieu of, or are they exempt from that on this particular project?
I would defer to Mr. Cataret.
Since this property has already been platted, the land dedication or the fee in lieu is done at the time of platting, so that has already been taken care of for any development of this property.
Thank you. And then my second question, the wording used was the intent was to be a 55-plus community. Do we have any assurances that it would stay that? Is there anything that we lock in, or is it just that's the intent, and if, gee, the market's not quite what we thought it was, all of a sudden this is opened up to 20-something-year-olds that can afford the rent?
Staff was anticipating that question, so thank you for the setup. Mr. Zur.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy to provide at least some input from this. There would obviously be some negotiations that occur. Initial thought for a response would be during the 15-year time frame, you're going to be required to maintain compliance with regard to state of Missouri applications, audit, and inspection. I heard all of those. After the 15-day or 15-year time frame, I presume those are no longer imposed upon at that point. Two options. One could be through restrictive covenants. The other could be if the property is rezoned to a PUD designation for multifamily. Under a development agreement, you could potentially include language that would have restrictive provisions in it. If we're talking in terms of restrictive covenants, you could potentially discuss prohibition of altering the age or the low income restrictions without prior city approval, allow the city to receive annual audits, and allow potentially voiding of any amendments that would remove that. The real question boils down to what kind of enforcement you have, and it's really tough to come up with some idea as to what enforcement is. The only thing I could see is we've got an individual entity. It's not going to be individually owned. They're going to be owned by the developer or the developer's management company, and the notion would be that development company or management company may well need to have business licenses in the city of Raymore that could potentially attach to for enforcement, but I have not been able to identify a direct line between the two. So enforcement may be an option that could have difficulty. The PUD zoning designation in the development agreement could be potentially roped into it that as far as restrictive covenants are concerned as well. That's the initial analysis. I'd obviously invite the applicant. He's been involved in more of these processes, and I'm sure may have some input as well.
Yeah, and I apologize if that was unclear. When we submit our application to the Missouri Housing Development Commission, we have to designate at that time whether this is a multifamily or so open to anybody or a 55 and older development. We will be submitting this as a 55 and older development. As part of that, we'll have to submit a LURA, a land use restriction, that qualifies that, stating anybody that moves into this during that compliance period is required to be 55 and older. So during that 15-year or 30-year, the QAP from Missouri hasn't come out yet, but no less than 15 years, it'll be a 55 and older development. Beyond that time, I would say this, I'm not going to sit here and tell you definitively that it would be 55 and older. Likely, if it were doing great as a 55 and older project, which there doesn't seem to be any reason there wouldn't be any reason not to keep it as 55 and older. However, when that time comes, there's a disposition agreement that we have with our tax credit syndicators, and they're the ones ultimately that are going to have to be comfortable with all of the disposition agreements, whether that means that the project stays a 55 and older project going forward, whether they would allow a PUD like that on their project, on the property. Those are all things that, are fully negotiable during our closing and due diligence project, but I can't sit here and definitively say after the compliance period it would stay that. I could say that as a private developer and private development on private land, we would certainly be open to negotiation, but I would also say that if the city is going to try to impose certain restrictions, we are definitely going to make sure that we are getting some benefit on the back end, like sales tax abatement. So it's a little bit of a two-way street there, but we're certainly open to negotiation as it relates to that.
Mr. Barber? Oh, wait, did you have something you want to add to that?
The short form of all of that, through Jonathan's research, sir, is the only point in time that we have been able to identify to date where the council could put restrictions on is during the rezoning from the commercial that it currently exists to turning it into zoning for multifamily residential with a PUD placed on it, and the covenants of that or the restrictions that could be put on would be at that point in time. The issue being that, like anything we do with a rezoning down the line, it's 15 years from now, what enforcement actions do we have in place to say you are now in violation of something that was put on in this type of a situation, because it just hasn't existed for us. We do have a little bit more than we did perhaps with our original application that went through for Ridgeway Villas, because they didn't have to rezone. Everything was in place and they could kind of do what they wanted, but that would be your one and only time.
Mr. Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The residents to the south are duplexes, and I'm kind of looking here, the residents to the east are the duplexes as well. And this may be a Mr. Cataract question too, but if this was to get rezoned to multifamily, would there be allowance in our zoning for a buffer zone between the residents to the east? I mean, the way it's pictured, and I know it's just kind of a crude picture here, but it looks like it's right on top of their backyard, so I don't know, would there be allowance for that?
There would, sir, there would be a requirement for some buffering. It'd be along the property line between the existing duplexes to the east and the new development. So they would have to do some screening.
Yeah, and again, I was just going, you know, this is, like you said, kind of crude. And if we needed to, you know, we could probably lop off, you know, a bay to help provide that buffer and take it from 46 to 42. So, you know, again, we don't want to overtower our neighbors to the east. We'll want to make sure they're happy too and not frustrated there. So if we need to scale it back, you know, these are the reasons we have these meetings, to discuss this stuff now and get it done before we put it in for final application.
Thank you. Ms. Moorhead?
Mr. Fearborn, just for clarification, I understood that the development just north of Price Chopper, when we approved that, that actually was a restrictive covenant without a PUD.
There was a deed restriction put on, that is correct, sir. The problem with the deed restriction is it's about a quarter of a step lower than what you could be doing. I want to give you I'm trying to give you the option of the biggest hammer you could have, for lack of a better term. And as Mr. Zur described it, it would be before you for your hand up or hand down during the rezoning. So you could have them both on there. You could require the deed restriction, but at the same time, there could be something within the wording of granting the rezoning that would also be on there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ullman?
Thank you. Would those same restrictions put on either by the state within that 15-year period or us through like a planned unit development designation, would those transfer if the property were sold within that time period?
If I might, the answer would be if it's a deed restriction, the deed restriction goes with the property until the deed restriction is revoked, or until the owner of the property, along with whatever other entities that are required to remove the deed restriction, would be approved. The potential would be basically the city could potentially serve as a third-party beneficiary under the restrictive covenants, basically saying that the removal of the 55 and older requirements would require city approval, or let the city be able to continue on audit and review. Now, that is a stretch, and we have not done that in the past. Again, something for negotiation with the developer.
Go ahead.
In addition, because the wording is a little bit odd in here, just wanted to be sure, they use the term in the presentation tax abatement. What they're actually talking about is when we do a public project, the contractor who we've contracted with comes to us and asks us for a sales tax exemption letter because they're doing the work for the city. In essence, the Chapter 100 that they're talking about in here is doing the same thing. The incentive that they are asking for the city is limited to asking for Chapter 100 to be applied so that during construction, they could have tax abatement on the purchase of the materials associated with the construction. And at this time, that's all they're asking for as far as incentive from the city.
Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have we done anything like this in projects in the past, as far as the 100% abatement for construction materials?
This would be the first time we've had, again, all of our public projects, we do that on, but those are our projects. For a private developer, this would be the first time that we would be utilizing Chapter 100, which was approved by the council as as part of the economic development policy for the city probably about a half a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah, much of the other, John, much of the other construction that's gone on over the past 7 or 8 years has been through TIFs. And so that's a lot more that goes on with that than just the Chapter 100. So there have been concessions given, but they've been at a much larger scale, a much greater cost than just the Chapter 100.
So they're estimating $200,000 or $400,000 in savings. Am I right that that's $200,000 or $400,000 that the city won't be earning? Is that accurate?
No, that's the difference. That's why I wanted to make the clarification between an abatement and what they're actually asking for. This would be, they do not pay sales tax. If they're buying the Firestone wall from company XYZ, they're not paying sales tax on that when they have Chapter 100.
Mr. Holman.
Thank you. I'm curious, obviously you've done your homework, you've done these projects in the past, and there's a financial incentive if you get the Chapter 100 bonds and the tax abatement, if you will, back from the state through that project. Did you do any market research as to the demand for 55-plus housing here? I mean, and the reason I ask that is we have Foxwood Springs, which has been an icon in this city for a long time and is our largest 55-plus community. We have Benton House, which was recently put in the last 2 years. We have Moon Valley. I'm probably missing a couple of others, but I'm just not sure. Morning View is another one. Thank you. I'm just curious, did you feel like you had a pretty good demand to fill that need here for the number of units that you're proposing?
Yeah, Raymore's roughly 20,000 person community and growing. As I understand it, it's one of the fastest growing communities in the state of Missouri. And we're talking about 45 units. So this isn't an astronomical development. And to that point, some of the statistics, and I didn't get into the minutia on them, but again, every community's got 55 and older developments and senior developments. And what I think separates this from some of the others is the affordability factor. The housing market does not have enough units of affordable product out there. There's a lot of 55 and older that may run you $1,200 a month or $1,300 a month. There's not a lot that you can get for $650, and that's where there's a huge demand, not only just for senior housing across the board, that market's still strong, but especially in the affordable realm.
Mrs. Dugwad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I completely agree with that. I think that we definitely have a need for this in Raymore. We do have a lot of areas that are restricted to 55 and older, but several of those areas are much larger, much more expensive homes. Mr. Behrens and I met, maybe it's been 2 weeks ago, with some people who live in Morning View, and those homes are smaller, and they said they're full. They don't have any lots to build anymore. They said when a house, lots of times the houses in Morning View don't even go on the market before they're purchased by someone else, like publicly, because there's such a high demand for that smaller home for the 55 and older crowd. A lot of them can't afford, or maybe just don't want, the maintenance as far as just cleaning inside, because most of those provide the outside maintenance, but they just want a smaller place to take care of, a smaller place to live in. They don't need all the space of the big homes like in the Good Ranch or like in Alexander Creek or, you know, some of those neighborhoods. So I feel like there is a need for this in our community. I'm happy to see it coming. I think that the blend of the affordable mixed with the market value, I think that's something that is definitely beneficial. I like, of course, the community space. And another one we have that is kind of similar to this is it on Walnut? We have a very small 55 and older community there, and they've gotten some tax incentives from the state to do some remodeling and things there as well. So it's not the first time we've seen something like this come through Raymore.
And we have an 80-unit senior housing development just east of 435 in KCK, very near the Speedway. And that project was finished in 2008, I believe it was. And it has been 100% leased with anywhere from a 200 to 300 person wait list the entire time. And in fact, Congressman Yoder was there last week, and he was so intrigued with the program as a whole, he decided to go ahead and co-sponsor the next day one of the bills that's currently going through the House to get approved to expand the tax credit program. So like I mentioned earlier, there's an incredibly boring C-SPAN video I can send any of you that want to see kind of some more of the meat behind these bills and what people in the tax credit community, both from the private and the public sector, are saying. In fact, one of the professors at KU was invited to be a witness and testify as part of that hearing about furthering this. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of people trying to push this forward to expand the program, because it's a big problem throughout the U.S.
Mr. Barber.
Yeah, I'm not against this. This is something I need to digest a little bit, but just for the record, let's not use the term senior. Let's say 55 and older, because we do have some council people that are writing that 55.
Good point. Good point. Well, thank you. If there's nothing else, is there a consensus that we move forward with the resolution, or did you have something else?
I wanted to address that question. This affects Ward 2 specifically. This is the first time we were even given any of this material. It's a little bit quick to digest this and just quickly go to a vote, especially with tax credits, tax abatements attached to it. I would support a continued conversation about this. I would not want a final resolution voted on tonight, just because I think residents are worthy of more than 42 minutes of conversation before they go to a vote. So I'm supportive of continuing this conversation, but I'd like to digest this a little bit. I know Mr. Burke and I would like to talk to Ward 2 people about this, and just so my encouragement is to go forward, but not with a final vote.
Well, yeah, not tonight. We don't have the resolution. I mean, to put it on the agenda for the next council meeting. Because I mean, they're under a tight deadline too for their letter of support. That's basically what the resolution is giving them a letter of support they can put in their application file to move forward with their request for the tax abatement, or tax, what do they call it?
Tax credit allocation.
Tax credit allocation, thank you.
I guess from staff's perspective, when you say continued discussion, are you talking about having it on another work session agenda or having the resolution on for continued discussion next Monday night? What are your thoughts there, Councilmember?
I'd be fine with, if we had it next Monday night, to have it as a public conversation. I just didn't want anything formally tonight.
no.
So we just, again, anyone who wishes to kind of digest this, vote either for or against, be able to publicly discuss it, talk about different options, that's all. I will respectfully say, though, and Mr. Nook, I mean nothing directly to you, but if this is good or bad to our community, I'm not concerned with your deadline. We want, if the community wants this, we'll be happy to support it, but not at anybody else's deadline.
I understand. And I also want to make sure we don't need to resolve the tax discussion. That's not something that has to be, figured out in a week by any stretch of the imagination. I also want to clarify the resolution of support. We go to every city and ask for that. State of Kansas requires it. Missouri does not, but we still come and ask for it because we believe in coming in and getting support of the community. Nebraska doesn't require it. We went and asked for it. That's something we do because we want to make a long-term investment in the communities we're in. We don't have to do it, but I don't really know how you get approved without it. So somehow, some do. But that's not our mode. That's not the way we work. But at the same token, this is also a private development. And the discussion of, if tax incentives become part of it, clearly there's a lot more at stake for the city. And as I mentioned, we're more than happy to work through and work with the city in making both the city and ourselves comfortable with the decisions that move forward and our investors. But I also want to make sure we're careful when we're talking about rezoning, that we're talking about land use and not people use. This cannot be a discussion on who lives there. It has to be a discussion on whether residential is the appropriate use for that land. So when we start talking about restricting to 55 and older because we don't want 20-somethings living there, that's walking a very, very dangerous line in terms of fair housing. And so I would caution that when we're looking at this from a use standpoint, you're looking at it from a residential versus commercial use, and is that the appropriate zoning? We're talking about zoning. We cannot discriminate about who lives there.
Mr. Burke, did you have something?
Yes, I did, but then based on the developer's last comment, I'm kind of confused, and now I don't know if I want to say what I was going to say. Well, I'm not sure why. I'm curious as to the last statement, where that came from and what the motivation was there, because it sounded like maybe we're going against the 55 and older. And for me, there are, speaking as a resident for 18 years, as a teacher in the district, and knowing where we're at, there are some, with multifamily, there are some red flags for me and my constituents, and this was not hitting those red flags. But then your last comment made me kind of confused, so I didn't understand that.
My only point was that as a private developer, when cities, if we weren't asking for tax credits and we were just coming to do a market rate deal, the only requirement would be that we come and get rezoned. We probably wouldn't be sitting here having a resolution of support discussion. We'd probably just put it on the agenda and say we want to rezone multifamily, and there would be a planning commission hearing to see whether commercial was the appropriate use for that development or not. And my only point with that comment is we want to do a 55 and older project, but understand that it is a private development, and if the city is going to try to put restrictive covenants, PUDs, certain things on that, it needs to be coming from a very, there needs to be a very, I don't know what the right word is for it, substantive reason to be doing that. Because that puts us in a tougher position. That removes some flexibility as developers and owners of a project that we have. We're giving up something in a private development that, you know, why? And so all I'm saying is we really want to be in Raymore, and we really want to do a development here. We've had great meetings with Mr. Fearborn, the mayor, and Matt, and I think this can be a fantastic development. I just want to make sure that everyone's understanding that, yes, we want to do a 55 and older development, but, and we're here to get support from the community. We're not asking for the tax items to be resolved tonight. I want to make sure everyone understands, you know, as part of this program, this is a private development, and we are asking for a resolution because we want to have support from the community. We want to have your support, and because we're going to be here for no less than 15 years. But, you know, I also have to look out for our interests as well and make sure that when we're discussing things like covenants and PUDs that may put restrictions on our development and our flexibility down the road, there's an understanding that those need to be done and born out of the right course of action, not because there's a concern for what happens in 15 years if it's no longer a 55 and older development. Because again, I just want to make sure it's not, we're not talking about zoning, we're talking about zoning, not who lives there. So that's, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I think I saw some nodding that we move forward with the resolution. There'll be probably more discussion.
Sure.
At that point, but, okay. And still got to go to P and Z even if that gets to that next step, so a lot more work to be done.
Understood. Well, thank you everybody for your time this evening. You know, Mr. Fearborn and Matt both have my contact information. If anybody has any questions at all or concerns or whatever, either funnel them through me or ask them for my info, and I'll be happy to give you any more particulars or help answer any questions if something gets forgot tonight. I'd love to continue to have these dialogues and look forward to getting something done here.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so given that, our next item is executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we enter into executive session to discuss litigation matters as authorized by RSMO 610.021 subsection 1.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded to move into executive session. Can I have a roll call, Mr. Zur?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Moorhead?
Yes.
Councilmember Townsend?
Yes.
Councilmember Berenson?
Yes.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Barber?
Yes.
Councilmember Abdelgawad?
Yes.
Okay, we're in, we can do the executive session here because the